Omar Beckford was the kind of man who lived simply but held deeply rooted values. A 34-year-old mechanic from the heart of St. Catherine Parish, Jamaica, he was raised in a modest, God-fearing household where masculinity, family, and tradition were everything. His life revolved around work, church, and football matches on Sundays. While others in his age group explored social media trends and global travel, Omar remained grounded. His world was the island, his dreams humble. Omar had never been lucky in love. Relationships came and went, often strained by his conservative views and quiet demeanor. But that all changed when a longtime friend introduced him to someone new, Layla. She was striking, with smooth caramel skin, long black hair that cascaded down her back, and a smile that carried mystery and charm. Her online photos were mesmerizing, and her soft, eloquent voice during video calls captivated him even more. Layla claimed she lived in Kingston, but had spent several years abroad in the United States. She spoke with a slight American twang, dressed with a touch of foreign flair, and seemed worldlier than the women Omar was used to. That only added to her allure. She told him she was tired of the city life and looking for something real, something rooted. Their online relationship blossomed quickly. What began as casual messages evolved into nightly video chats and romantic calls that stretched into the early morning hours. Layla always seemed a bit guarded, especially about meeting in person or sharing too much about her past. But Omar didn't press. In his mind, modesty and shyness were virtues. She explained away her distance by saying she valued doing things the right way, preferring to truly get to know someone before rushing into anything physical. Over the next few months, Layla began visiting Omar on weekends. She arrived in modest outfits, spoke respectfully to his mother, and carried herself with the poise of a woman raised with manners. The entire community took notice. Omar finally found a real queen, they'd say in passing. His friends congratulated him. His mother began hinting about grandchildren. It wasn't long before Omar proposed. He did it the traditional way, on bended knee after Sunday service in front of family and friends. Layla wept tears of joy and accepted without hesitation. There was no long engagement. Within 3 months, they were married in a small but lively church ceremony, decorated with white lilies and draped in the sounds of gospel reggae. The town came out to celebrate, dancing, drinking, and sending the couple off in a haze of rice and rum. To everyone who watched them drive away in their decorated car, Omar and Layla looked like the perfect pair. A local boy finally finding his dream woman. A new life together just beginning. But beneath the smiles and champagne toasts, Layla carried a truth she feared could destroy everything. And as their honeymoon approached, that truth drew closer to the surface, waiting to explode. Layla Thompson had learned early in life that secrets could be both a shield and a sword. Born Lionel Everton Thompson in Spanish Town, she never fit the mold expected of her. As a child, she preferred dolls to toy cars, silk to denim, and dancing in her mother's heels to playing rough with her brothers. Her father, a stern Pentecostal deacon, dismissed her mannerisms as foolishness. But the teasing from neighbors and beatings from her father only pushed Layla deeper inside herself. At 17, Lionel left Jamaica under the pretense of staying with a relative in New York. In reality, it was an escape, a chance to begin anew. By 20, Lionel became Layla, fully embracing her gender identity. Hormone therapy transformed her body, and surgeries reshaped her features into the soft, feminine silhouette she had always imagined. In America, she found freedom, community, and a sense of belonging. She returned to Jamaica 5 years later, older, wiser, and determined to live life on her own terms. But Jamaica hadn't changed. The country remained deeply conservative, especially toward anything that challenged the rigid norms of gender and sexuality. The LGBTQ+ community still lived in the shadows, often facing verbal abuse, physical violence, or worse. For Layla, passing as a woman wasn't just about identity, it was about survival. When she met Omar through a mutual friend on Facebook, she had no intention of falling in love. He seemed sweet, respectful, and grounded, everything she'd never experienced in past relationships. At first, she kept things casual, always careful not to reveal too much. But as weeks turned into months, she found herself drawn to his simplicity, his devotion to family, and his unwavering sense of purpose. He wasn't like the others. He made her feel safe. Still, the fear remained. Could she ever tell him the truth? She had considered it many times during their first late-night conversation, during their walks in the countryside, and especially the night he proposed. But every time the words caught in her throat. How do you tell a man raised in rigid masculinity that the woman he loves wasn't born female? Her therapist in Kingston once warned her. You have to be honest before marriage, Layla. Otherwise, it's not love. It's illusion. But Layla had convinced herself that if she just kept pretending, kept avoiding intimacy, she could protect them both from the fallout. Omar had respected her boundaries when she said she wanted to wait until the honeymoon. In her mind, that bought her time. Perhaps she thought love would overpower the truth, if it ever came out at all. As the wedding approached, Layla began to unravel internally. Nights became sleepless, and the anxiety gnawed at her like a secret monster. She rehearsed confession speeches in front of the mirror, but fear always won. One slip, one word, and she could be shunned, attacked, or worse, murdered. When she walked down the aisle in her flowing white dress, her hands trembled beneath the bouquet. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she also believed naively that maybe Omar loved her enough to forgive anything. What she didn't know was how deep Omar's pride ran, and how easily love could turn to hate in the face of betrayal. The truth would come out. It always did. And when it did, it wouldn't just break hearts, it would spill blood. The newlyweds arrived in Negril just before sunset, the coastal air rich with the scent of salt and wild orchids. The ocean shimmered beneath a sky painted in hues of orange and pink as they checked into a luxurious cliffside resort known for its breathtaking views and candlelit dining. It was everything Layla had dreamed of, a temporary escape from judgment, suspicion, and the heavy truth she carried. For Omar, it was a reward for his patience and loyalty. He had waited months to be alone with his wife. Finally, she was his. The suite was romantic. Plush king-sized bed, a jacuzzi near the window overlooking the sea, and welcome champagne on ice. Layla smiled, but inside she was trembling. She had been avoiding this moment for so long, clinging to the illusion that love would shield her from consequences. But the walls were closing in. The honeymoon was no longer an abstract future, it was now. The first night passed peacefully. They ate grilled snapper on the beach, laughed about the wedding, and danced under the stars to the slow rhythm of Lover's Rock. Layla fended off Omar's advances with affectionate teasing and blamed exhaustion. He seemed to understand, kissing her forehead and whispering, "Tomorrow then." She nodded, her smile forced, her heart pounding. The next day, Omar was in high spirits. They went snorkeling in the morning, toured a local rum distillery in the afternoon, and returned to the suite just after sunset. Layla noticed his eyes lingered more now, on her hips, her waist, her lips. He was waiting, expecting. Dinner was quiet. Tension began to simmer under the surface. Layla picked at her food. Omar studied her. "You still tired?" he asked. "A little," she said, looking away. He reached for her hand. "Me love ya, Layla. You know dat, right?" She nodded. "Me wait long enough. It not fair," he added gently but firmly. "Me wife now. Me have the right." The moment stretched into silence. Layla's throat dried. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Omar," she began, voice cracking, but she was too late. Later that night, in the dim light of their suite, when Layla finally said she couldn't go through with intimacy, Omar pressed harder. A back and forth unfolded, at first, just words, then confusion, then insistence. When he tried to undress her, She resisted, panic flashing in her eyes. That's when he saw it. The scar from past surgeries. The absence of what he expected. What dis? He asked, stepping back, his face contorting. What the hell dis is? Layla tried to explain. Omar, listen to me. Please. I was going to tell you. You was going to tell me what? His voice exploded, shaking the walls. Yeah, man? You trick me? From D-start. She pleaded with him, reaching for his arm. He shoved her back. Me married ya. Me tell me matta. Me friends. You disgrace me. Tears streamed down her face. I didn't want to lie. I was scared. You don't understand. People like me. We get killed. You shoulda dead from long time. He barked, eyes wild with fury. Neighbors would later say they heard shouting. One said she heard glass shatter. Another claimed to hear a scream, but assumed it was just a lover's quarrel. At 3 a.m., a security guard noticed Omar leaving the suite shirtless, barefoot, visibly shaken. He walked past the front desk without a word and vanished into the humid night. Layla was never seen alive again. Morning broke with golden sunlight spilling over the Negril cliffs. The ocean was calm, lapping gently at the rocks below. Guests at the resort stirred to life, some heading for early yoga on the lawn, others sipping coffee on balconies with sweeping views of the Caribbean Sea. It was paradise in every sense. Until the scream. Just after 7:15 a.m., a housekeeper on her morning rounds noticed that the door to the newlywed suite was ajar. She knocked softly, expecting a sleepy guest or a forgotten request from the night before. But when she stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. The room was in disarray. Pillows scattered, a shattered champagne glass near the bed, and one high-heeled shoe lying on its side near the balcony. The bed was untouched. The housekeeper's instinct led her to the open balcony doors, where curtains fluttered in the breeze. She stepped outside, looked over the edge, and screamed. Down below, where the cliff met the rocks and ocean spray, lay the broken body of a woman in a blood-soaked nightgown. Her limbs were twisted at unnatural angles. A long gash ran across her forehead, and one hand was outstretched as if reaching for something that would never come. Nearby, a silver chain necklace, torn, glinted in the sun. The jagged rocks beneath her were streaked with red. Hotel staff scrambled into action, calling emergency services. Within the hour, local police arrived and cordoned off the area. Tourists were ushered away from the scene, many of them shaken. The hotel manager tried to keep order while quietly contacting the corporate office, already fearing the media storm that would follow. Detective Inspector Mervyn Douglas arrived on site by mid-morning. A seasoned officer, he had seen his share of grisly deaths, but this one felt different. The victim was identified quickly. Layla Beckford, a 29-year-old woman, newlywed, guest of the hotel for only 2 days. Initial examination of the scene suggested a fall, but the blood trail, bruises on her arms, and defensive wounds on her hands told a different story. This wasn't an accident. It was violence. Brutal, intentional, personal. Witnesses soon told police about the argument heard the night before. One guest in the next room recalled, "There was yelling. A man shouting about lies, about being tricked." Another guest described hearing a woman sobbing and something heavy hitting the wall. The timing of the noises placed the altercation between midnight and 2 a.m. A critical lead came from a security guard who reported seeing Omar Beckford, shirtless, eyes wild, walking barefoot across the resort lawn around 3 a.m. When asked why he hadn't reported it, the guard shrugged. "Me tink dem just had a fight. People argue. Negril is honeymoon central. Dat kind of ting happen." By late afternoon, a bulletin was issued for Omar Beckford's arrest. But they didn't have to search far. He was found sitting silently on a bench in Montego Bay, 2 hours away from the resort, staring out at the sea. His clothes were stained, sandy at the knees, his wedding ring still on his finger. He didn't resist when officers approached. In fact, he looked almost relieved. At the station, during questioning, Omar spoke softly at first. Then, with shaking hands and a voice soaked in disbelief, he said, "She lied. Me no know she was a man. Me married her. And she tricked me." Detectives pressed further, asking about what happened on the balcony. Omar's jaw clenched. "Me snap. Me never plan fi kill her. But me see de scar. And everything just break. Me feel shame. Like me whole life a joke. Like me name a mash-up." When asked directly if he pushed her, he looked away and said nothing. That silence was enough. The courtroom in downtown Kingston was packed the day Omar Beckford's trial began. Spectators lined the wooden benches, the air thick with curiosity and tension. Journalists from both local and international outlets filled the aisles, pens poised, cameras flashing. The case had become a media sensation, an explosive blend of marriage, gender identity, betrayal, and death that struck at the heart of a deeply conservative culture. From the first day, it was clear this trial would be about more than murder. It was about ideology, identity, and who was allowed to live safely in their truth. The prosecution's case. The prosecution, led by senior Crown Counsel Claudine Mendez, wasted no time painting a picture of calculated violence. This was not a crime of passion, she stated firmly during her opening remarks. This was an execution, a punishment meted out in rage, fueled by hatred, bigotry, and wounded pride. They presented hotel surveillance footage of Omar and Layla entering the suite, and the same camera showing Omar alone, hours later, storming out in a daze. Forensic evidence placed him at the scene. Blood on his clothing matched Layla's. Scratches on his arms suggested a struggle. But perhaps the most damning detail was the coroner's report. Layla had been hit hard before she fell. There were bruises on her neck, a possible sign of attempted strangulation. "He didn't just push her," Mendez said coldly. "He beat her. He wanted her to suffer." The defense's argument. But Omar's defense attorney, Marcus Daly, took a different approach. "This is not a man who planned murder," he began. "This is a man who was deceived, violated emotionally, psychologically. In that moment, he was not in his right mind. He was humiliated, betrayed, and pushed past the brink." Daly argued that Omar was raised in a community where gender and identity are tightly bound to cultural and religious norms. He called expert witnesses who testified about the stigma around gender nonconformity in Jamaican society. He tried to frame Omar not as a killer, but as a man driven to madness by shock. And then the defense dropped its bombshell, a request for temporary insanity. Public reaction. Outside the courthouse, the nation was divided. Some sympathized with Omar. Talk shows lit up with callers labeling Layla a deceiver, saying Omar's reaction, while tragic, was understandable. Religious groups protested outside the courtroom, holding signs that read, "God made Adam and Eve," and "Truth matters in marriage." But LGBTQ+ activists pushed back with equal fervor. The tragic death of Layla Thompson ignited a movement that had long been smothered by fear. Protesters carried banners that read "Her name was Layla," and "Trans Lives Matter in Jamaica too." Vigils were held in Kingston and Montego Bay. Layla became both a victim and a symbol. International human rights groups condemned the rhetoric surrounding the case. Amnesty International issued a statement criticizing the defense's victim-blaming narrative. Social media erupted with hashtags like #JusticeForLayla and #EndTransViolence. After 3 weeks of emotional testimony, witness statements, and forensic analysis, the jury deliberated for only 5 hours. Omar Beckford was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, in delivering the sentence, said, "You were deceived, but deception does not justify death. The court cannot excuse a brutal killing on the grounds of hurt pride. We are not here to pass judgment on lifestyle, but on action. And your actions were monstrous." Omar was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 20. He showed no reaction as the sentence was read. His face was blank, like a man still lost in the moment he shattered. The trial left deep scars on the island. Conversations shifted, uncomfortable, raw, but necessary. Radio hosts debated gender politics. Schools began to quietly discuss tolerance. And activists pushed harder than ever for anti-discrimination laws to protect LGBTQ+ individuals in a country where being different could still get you killed. Layla's death had become more than a tragedy. It was a mirror forcing the nation to look at itself and what it chose to ignore. The sea outside Layla's childhood home in Spanish Town whispered against the shore the day her ashes were scattered. A small group gathered for the private memorial, close friends, a few distant cousins, and members of the LGBTQ+ community who had known her by her true name, her true self. The ceremony was simple but powerful. A photo of Layla stood beside the urn. Her radiant smile, her soft eyes, the woman she had fought to become. Wind played with the edge of her silk scarf, tied lovingly around the photo frame. As her ashes danced across the waves, someone whispered, "Fly free now, Layla." Her parents were not there. Her mother had quietly distanced herself from Layla when she transitioned. Her father refused to speak her name at all, insisting she had died years ago. That rejection had left deep wounds, but Layla never allowed it to define her. She had chosen love even when the world offered fear. Now, her name lived on as a symbol, not only of the violence she endured, but of the quiet courage it took to live authentically in a country that demanded conformity. Omar's sentence and solitude. Omar Beckford now sits behind bars at the St. Catherine Adult Correctional Center, the same parish where he was born, raised, and once dreamed of raising a family. In prison, he is a man of few words. He has no visitors. His mother, once proud of her hard-working son, has withdrawn into silence, devastated by the shame of what he's done. Fellow inmates whisper about the case. Some mock him, others sympathize. But even behind bars, in the rigid world of hypermasculine prison hierarchy, Omar is both pitted and feared, not for his crime, but for what it says about masculinity and vulnerability. A man betrayed, a man who snapped, or a man who revealed the fragility of ego when wrapped in pride and homophobia. His lawyers have spoken of a possible appeal, citing emotional trauma and cultural pressure. But few believe it will succeed. In the months following her death, Layla's story traveled far beyond Jamaica's shores. LGBTQ+ rights organizations across the Caribbean and abroad took up her name as a rallying cry. Memorial murals appeared in Kingston and even in Miami's Little Haiti district, where many Caribbean immigrants settled. Local advocates pushed harder for legislative reform. A bill, long buried in Parliament, that would criminalize discrimination based on gender identity was brought back into discussion. Politicians who once dodged the issue were now forced to respond. Layla Thompson's life was not a lie, said activist Nadine Clark in a televised interview. Her death was the product of our society's refusal to accept the truth that people like her exist, love, and bleed just like the rest of us. Layla's best friend, Jermaine, one of the few people who knew her full story, founded the Layla Lives Foundation, aimed at providing safe housing and legal support for trans individuals across Jamaica. The foundation quickly gained support from overseas allies and brought global attention to the harsh realities many face in the region. The island heals slowly. Progress has been slow, uneven, and painful. Church leaders still preach fire and brimstone. Hate crimes remain common. But conversations are changing. In cafes and classrooms, in whispers and Facebook posts, people are beginning to ask questions they once avoided. Was it truly deception? Or was it society's unwillingness to accept complexity that caused the tragedy? Layla Thompson died on her honeymoon, not because of who she was, but because of a world that taught her existence was dangerous. Her story, violent, heartbreaking, unforgettable, now lingers in Jamaica's conscience. The waves continue to roll onto the shores of Negril, uncaring, indifferent. The cliff where she died is still beautiful. Tourists take photos near it, unaware of the blood once spilled beneath the rocks. But those who knew her story never forget. And for every young trans woman walking the tightrope of truth and survival in a society still learning how to love her back, Layla's name is not just a memory. It's a warning, prayer, a revolution,